What's up, guys? It is time for Q&A response for the week. Did a day earlier this week. Have normally do it on Mondays, but I probably won't be able to do it tomorrow evening, so I want to get it done today. It's Sunday, September 24th, so got some good questions. All the threads have been really good lately, so thank you for the questions. And we'll get started. Is there any way to manage the GI issues on metformin? The benefits are huge, obviously, but the gas and diarrhea are absolutely insane. And then goes on to say he's tried several different things and none of them work. So, biggest thing is with tolerance is normally, well, a couple things that I see is dose, obviously being one, and time. So, if you look at it in a clinical setting, like if a doctor is prescribing metformin, one of the things that I've heard, at least in my experience, is that it takes a little bit of time to acclimate to it, and then the GI issues tend to subside a little bit. Whether that's the only way to fix the issue or not, I would say probably not. Not dosing it too high is obviously another potential issue. I mean, really, a metformin can be effective clear down to a dose of 250 milligrams when a lot of people are using 500 to 1,000. So maybe start lower, and then third would probably be use extended release version, usually labeled as XR, I believe. So that would probably be the easiest way to still get the dose you want, and then also not have to worry about the gastrointestinal issues. So use the XR version. If not, still, if all else fails, just don't use it. I mean, it's because metformin can have some interference with absorption, and if you're having tons of GI issues, then you can pretty much guarantee that you're not absorbing nutrients very well anyhow, so it's not really giving you as many benefits as you think. And then you could try berberine. It's similar, not exactly the same mechanism, but it does have some similar benefits, though it can cause similar issues as well. So again, start slow. Next question: vision issues from Cardarine use possible, especially adjusting from dark, light, and vice versa. Okay, so I haven't personally seen this, and Cardarine's GW 501516, I think how you say it exactly, but a lot of people use it for its basically caloric wasting benefits for fat loss. So I have not seen it personally in anyone that I know. However, if you do a little digging online and read about it a little bit, it is a possible side effect. Though everything I've seen, it says, basically leads to, like you said, adjusting from dark and light. So it's kind of a delayed adjustment going from from darkness to light. It's hard to adjust, but it goes away once you discontinue use. So there's nothing that I know of that you can do while you're using it to help adjust other than just lower dose. But same thing happens with S4, which is a SARM. Cardarine is not a SARM, but there's also some yellowing in the vision with that, and it also goes away when you discontinue. So discontinue use would be one way, or lower dose, but otherwise deal with it. Let's see, next one. What peptides do you feel to be most optimal while in prep? IGF, HGH, frag, ostarine. Okay. So, first off, ostarine's not a peptide, so that would be a SARM. But there's a lot of context to this question. So, growth hormone would technically be a peptide anyhow, so that would probably be better than HGH, frag, and GHRP and CJC and all those. So that would be number one probably, but some people that's not an option. So peptide wise, it could be a basic GnRH and GHRP stack. So CJC no DAC with ipamorelin or GHRP2, something like that. That's a basic, 2 to 3 times a day, empty stomach. I'm not going to go into the whole dosing scheme, but that would be a really basic way. The HGH frag could be added in there too. That's kind of run solo. That could be done, 2 to 3 times a day. Especially works really well in the morning dosing. So someone that's doing fasted cardio, someone's using yohimbine, things like that, is going to work really well just because you're going to mobilize more fatty acids that way, and also with yohimbine, and then with the fasted cardio, you're going to burn everything off. So that would be an option for the morning only dosing, and then like I said, the GHRP, GnRH would be next. But you could use that multiple times a day. IGF, it's usually seems to have a partitioning benefit for most people. That's why, hence the bigger pumps that it gives. So that could really be used anytime. It's just expensive for most people, and it's just hit or miss. So that's kind of just budget dependent on the person. But it's not that it's useless. It's just it's not practical for everyone to use. And like I said, the Ostarine is actually a Sarm, so that would be, that would be more in the PED category. I guess they're all kind of PEDs, but more in the anabolics category. So, all right, macros are so confusing to me. Can you explain how to use them? Okay, so this is a basic question, which is fine. Q&A is open to whatever. So macros for this person, let's see if there's any more context to this. Yeah, I don't understand what they are, how to count. Okay. All right, well, macros are protein, carbs, and fat. So those are your 3 macronutrients. You could throw fiber in there if you wanted. Fiber is, I think, good to track, but for real basic, on a very basic level, protein, carbs, fat, tracking them, there's a lot of apps you can use. That's the easiest way. You have MyFitnessPal, My Macros. Those are probably the 2 most popular ones that people use. And then if you become really proficient at it, you can just use Microsoft Excel like on a spreadsheet, if you know the foods pretty well, or you're good at looking up the foods. So that's what your macros actually are. In order to find them, that's tricky because there are calculators and things you can use along those lines, but first and foremost, I think the easiest thing for most people to do is just look at a basic that take a couple days, make it 48 hours of eating. Eating relatively the same things, whatever a typical day is like for you as an individual, and then figure out, punch those foods into one of those macro trackers and figure out what your calories are, and think, okay, so I'm either losing weight with this, or I'm gaining weight with this, or my weight's the same, and you can figure out, is this my calorie maintenance? If you're gaining weight, then you're in a calorie surplus. If you're losing weight, you're in a calorie deficit. And if you're staying the same, then that's probably about your maintenance. And then you can figure out, do I need to go up or down depending on my goals? And you can calculate your macros that way. So with the macros, if you're just looking at a super basic level, protein's going to be first and foremost, anything around the 1 gram per pound of body weight or per pound of lean body mass range is pretty typical. So if you're 150 pounds, then, 150 grams. And then whatever your calories are, fill the rest in with carbs and fat. 4 calories per gram is protein, 4 calories per gram is carbs, and 9 calories per gram is fat. So fill it in. Make sure you're getting enough fiber for normal digestion. It could be in the 20 to 30 gram range, and see how it goes. It's hard to give you any more specifics from that, but that's a basic way to look at them and how to count them. And the apps are super easy to use. So next, what are the over-the-counter supplements would you add to particular PEDs, such as taurine for Clen, 5-HTP for Tren, or things like along those lines that many people may not be aware of. And I answered this too on there. There's not a whole lot beyond that, other than obviously with certain compounds, health markers are going to be thrown off. So, your over-the-counter health supplements, things to combat, keep your lipid profile normal, keep your blood pressure normal, blood viscosity normal, kidneys, liver, all that stuff. But the reason this question is asked is there are certain things that can be depleted by other compounds. So Tren, for example, gives problems with sleep. A lot of the time, there's normally a depletion of serotonin. So introduce 5-HTP to that, 200 to 300 milligrams per night, give or take, maybe 400 at most. Probably all that someone would need is going to help boost serotonin levels, and that's going to help with a lot of the sleep. I mean, people throw all kinds of sleep aids at it, all kinds of stuff, and not really knowing why it's affecting sleep. They're just throwing a bunch of shit at it and hoping that it works. So you actually know, hey, it depletes serotonin, then that could be a big part of the sleep issue. Then introduce more serotonin, and it's not a fix-all, but that's a big part of the issue. And then with Clen, the depletion of taurine, so you're adding the taurine plus the cramping, and taurine's also added to a lot of other stuff that gives the call like the low back pumps and stuff like that. That's, you can add the taurine to that. And hydration, it's great, when you're trying to be overly hydrated. But I mean, there's not a whole lot outside of that. The health supplements are going to come down to the person and their needs. And thoughts on programming, like when you would do a strength phase and focus on mechanical tension versus a phase focusing on muscle damage and cell swelling, and when you would do higher frequency. Personally, I like to try to incorporate everything, a little bit of every mechanism, I guess you could say, into a program. It's not always practical to do it that way, but if you're in a hypertrophy phase, it's nice to try to do it that way if you can. Because, I mean, you're going to have, there's different pathways to growth, volume being one, progressive overload being another one, and then mention cell swelling, so like the inflammatory portion of it. But it's, like I said, it's not always practical to do that. A lot of it's going to depend on, first off, what's the person's goal as far as, like, are they in a calorie deficit, or are they in a calorie surplus? What is their state of their nervous system at the time? That's another big one that's going to kind of determine what you can get away with and what you can't. Because all of these things are always, they are always beneficial. That's the thing. It's just that you can't always handle them and still be able to recover. It's not that progressive overload's beneficial one time and not the other. I mean, if you can progressively overload, it's pretty much going to be beneficial always. But you're just not going to be able to always do it. And then same with the cell swelling. I mean, something like that's always going to be beneficial to increase the capillary density. I mean, I've talked about this stuff before, but it's not that it's beneficial one time and not the other. I mean, this stuff's pretty much always beneficial. It's just that, like, I could give you a few examples. I'd say normally what I find most often is that folks can cycle through different mechanisms from phase to phase, and it tends to keep things fresh and progressing. So if they've been progressively overloading primarily for quite a while, and they're not finding they can't really progress anymore, even if you change, even if you're changing the movements around to try to reset and reprogress from there, and they're still not progressing, then you might go ahead and lean more towards volume at that point. That's another mechanism of growth. It's a huge driver of hypertrophy. So, increase the volume a little bit, bring the intensity down slightly, and then you're still growing. Someone with a really good nervous system, they might be able to have a pretty good amount of volume progression and still progressively overload if they can recover from it. So kind of rotating. I hate to say keep the body guessing, but I mean that's that's kind of what it is. If one, if one mechanism is kind of wore out or being overused, and then you have to transition to another, and then back to the other and back to the other. While I do try to incorporate each mechanism into a phase, I'll lean towards one thing or another. So if I'm in a volume phase, I'll still have points in the phase where I can progressively overload, or have someone progressively overload, or potentially progressively overload, but it's less. It's not like, it's maybe, because you can progressively overload in anything, obviously, but it's going to be easier on certain movements. So it might be 1 or 2 movements in that day that are programmed in that I can know they could probably progress on this. And then the rest is kind of more volume fill in. Or on a more progressively overloaded phase, they have more chances within that workout to do so, and a little bit less volume. And then that's actually what I find in most programming, at least what I've done. And then the self-swelling, that tends to be really added in whatever. I mean, even in a deficit, it can be beneficial as far as like keeping those weak areas fed with nutrients and lots of blood and a little bit of inflammation in there. It can be beneficial in just maintaining fullness and roundness in those areas. It's not a miracle. Definitely helps though. And it will fill in a little extra volume too, with pretty much no CNS impact, or very, very little CNS impact. So I hope that makes sense. So when easiest way to look at it in practical terms is usually when I'm in more of a volume phase, there's a little bit less progressive overload, but still some. And when I'm in a primary strength phase, there's a little bit less volume, but still, still enough to obviously grow, still enough to hit our MRV or close to it, or at least enough sets to be effective. I hope that makes sense. It's hard to give a better answer without having context, because I could literally have someone go in, they just progressively overload forever and keep going and progress. And I'm just like, well, I'm not going to switch it. Or someone that I just find that they respond better to more volume and a little bit less intensity. So it's hard to say unless you have the person's specifics, but that's the patterns that I see. Next one. Thoughts on dietary intake of potassium for bodybuilders. How much per day? Does the ratio between dietary sodium to potassium affect performance or nutrient absorption? So first off, yeah, I mean, the electrolytes are influential in nutrient absorption. We know that, especially, we've heard sodium and carbohydrates and things along those lines. So I do think that the ratio is somewhat important. I do think, though, that I think you should at least try to have, 1-to-1 ratio, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little more potassium than sodium. Maybe clear up to like a 2-to-1 potassium to sodium. But here's the thing. I think that salting meals and using sea salt especially has become more popular. So we're getting way more sodium because we're realizing the benefit of sodium. But at the same time, now more people are looking at potassium because they're realizing, oh, wait, we're getting all this sodium, where's our potassium? So potassium is really not as hard to get as people think. I mean, meat, for example, contains a pretty decent amount of potassium. Chicken breast, I mean, per few ounces, you're still getting, 200 to 300 milligrams of potassium, and people are eating tons of meat. Vegetables, I always include vegetables in everyone's programs. And just figure out vegetables they can tolerate, get a decent variety if I can, and they're all getting potassium that way, and quite a bit of it. It's really not that hard to get potassium. I don't really have many people supplement just because they don't need to. If they're on growth hormone, then there's a little bit more sodium retention, so might introduce more potassium then. But just in general terms, it's not that difficult to get potassium. If you're curious about it, you can go in and add up the amount of potassium. You can punch in a tracker or something like that and figure out the potassium that you're getting every day. And you should be getting a pretty decent amount. If not, add more vegetables in your plan. Add a little bit of fruit into your plan if you have carbs in your plan. Anything like that is going to be helpful. But again, it's not that hard. So if you are salting meals, be conscious of it, but eat plenty of potassium-rich foods, which your diet should have in it anyhow. One more. Your thoughts on Sarms versus PEDs? Well, commented on this one too. Sarms pretty much are a PED. I mean, Sarms are selective androgen receptor modulators. They gain popularity because of less side effects, just because they act more directly on the androgen receptor. And here's the thing: they do affect blood work. There's plenty of blood work. You can get online and search just forums, different stuff, people having it. And I've seen it personally, especially when most of Sarms were over the counter and people were using them a ton. I saw blood work. It definitely affects your lipids and pretty much everything that normal PED affects, or AAS affects. So it does do that. It does lower natural testosterone. It does all of those things. It's just lesser. So here's the issue, though, is that the effects are also lesser. So I don't know that there's really much benefit, because in order to get the same effects as a traditional compound, you have to take more. And then the fact that they have less side effects really doesn't make any difference, because now you're getting the same side effects. So we're close. They do work well for women, just because the androgenic part of it is not is very, very low. So that works well for women. See very few, like Ostrine, for example, works really great in women. Yet to see anyone have really any side effects from it, even at pretty good dose, even a male, a male's dose. That's not to say that it couldn't happen. Obviously, assess tolerance and what have you, and know that there's always risk. But I just don't see that much of a benefit, to be completely honest. If somebody that's maybe trying to introduce themselves to that side of things, excuse me, oh damn, they could look into using Sarms, but I wouldn't put a whole lot of merit in it, just from seeing all the blood work I've seen from them and people using them. They definitely have good effects. They definitely have less side effects, but they're also less effective. So really the ratio is still the same at the end of the day. So thanks for the question, guys. I hope I answered them all. I got a couple good ones, a programming one, stuff like that. Like I said, I can't give an exact answer, but I think I was able to give some good insight onto those. So that's it for this week, guys. I appreciate the questions, and we'll do it again soon.